Bill Kennedy at the Legal Services of Northern California. He's going to give us a little bit of grounding about why mapping data is effective. Why are we doing this at all? We're going to come back to me, and just going to give you some very, very basics about what GIS is and the fundamentals of how it works. Then we're going to hear from 3 practitioners in the field. First, we're going to hear from Bill Kennedy and an example of how he and the folks at Legal Services of Northern California use GIS mapping for advocacy. Dave Sobie at the Legal Aid of North Carolina is going to be talking to us about how one instance that they used GIS mapping for planning. And we're going to hear from Jonathan Pyle from Philadelphia Legal Assistance. He'll be talking about an example of the way they use GIS mapping for program assessment, assessing how they're doing. So these are 3 big areas where GIS mapping would be helpful to a program, and how we're going to, and how others are using them. I also want to mention that I have with me Mara Pelletieri. She's also here at Legal Services Corporation, and she works on the LRI page that many of you may be familiar with. And then to close today, I'm going to give you a couple names of some free tools you might want to check out. And then on May 14th and 21st, we're going to continue this conversation with a 2-part tutorial on Google Fusion Tables, which is one of the tools that we're going to talk about today. So with that, Bill, can you give us a little bit of explanation, of context? Why mapping?
Well, sure. I'd love to do that. And first, thank you, Christina, Brian, and Mara, for inviting me to present. Mapping's been a passion of mine for the past decade, and I'd just like to share with you why we think it's so important. 10 years ago, Legal Services in Northern California launched the Race Equity Project to put the tools of race-conscious advocacy into the hands of all of our advocates. Most of the tools grew out of lessons we gained from cognitive scientists who have provided to us a deeper understanding of bias, its formation, perpetuation, and remediation. We discovered that many of the assumptions about bias embedded in the law are wrong. We also learned from the cognitive scientists much about how the brain perceives, receives, processes, associates, and ultimately recalls information. And this has great relevance to advocates. There's a strong scientifically based advocacy imperative for using mapping and graphic presentations of data rather than using just the written word or oral advocacy alone. So on this map, we have certainly a map of the brain. Again, a visual presentation, which is much easier than just explaining by words what is happening. So what we learned from the cognitive scientists is there are 3 basic neural pathways to memory. When we're doing advocacy, we're trying to impact the person's memory. The first and most basic pathway to memory is found in the amygdala, which you will see in the center of the chart here. It's the oldest and the most reptilian part of the brain, and it was developed by the species to respond to fear, desire, and heightened emotion. It is the site of our fight or flight response, and also the center of post-traumatic stress disorder. It evolved to address the most basic needs of the species. Now, the second area is the medial temporal lobe, and it's the source of our long-term memory. This type of memory grows over time, and the brain actually creates memory trees that are actually value-laden, and they actually serve as filters to incoming data. We've all had the experience of speaking to an audience that is unmoved by the facts we relate, and this could be happening because the facts are simply irrelevant to the worldview presented in these memory trees. It's possible to change someone's mind and have them modify their memory trees, but this takes time and a lot of persuasion. go to the next slide. So we all have a third type of pathway to memory, and that's situated in the hippocampus. And it's the center of our spatial memory. It wants context to know how to store and relate information, and visualization provides the context. Now, the species developed the hippocampus, spatial memory, to reorient itself to its environment. It's used to find your way home. It's used to find water, to find prey. But it is fundamentally used to reorient the mind to changing environment. So the question, and it's remarkably unladen by baggage of historical filters. So to advocates, this is a great advantage. We have a moment to reach people before their worldview cuts off any meaningful dialogue. So let's just look at some examples. If we can go to the next slide. Here's a data set that shows foreclosures in the city of Redding, California. This is a great data set from which we can draw a lot of conclusions. And generally, as oral advocates, we would come in and we'd pick pieces of data, and we would say, this data set shows conclusively that the impact of foreclosures hit communities of color far greater than others. But presenting the data in this manner, we are going to the medial cortex, unless data itself strikes fear in you, in which case you might have a more primal response. But the reality is that this data can be picked apart. But go to the next slide. Here's the same data in a picture. And what this data shows is the darker areas are the areas of highest impact of foreclosures. And those who other maps would show, but intuitively people in Redding know these are the areas where people of color live and areas where poverty is highest. So the same set of data can bypass the filters, and it can paint a picture that makes the assimilation of thousands of bits of data possible, and allows engagement before the filters of a worldview are there. Next slide, please. Even before the cognitive science could measure the pathways through our brains and measure instruments, people knew for a long time that visual data was in fact more compelling. And this is a map created by W.E.B. Du Bois in Philadelphia's 7th Ward in 1899. And what Du Bois did here is charted the ownership of homes and measured it by poverty and race. So even before we knew what was going on scientifically, maps were powerful tools for persuasion. And that's why we want to use them. So next. Okay.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, I'm back. We're going to talk about just the very, very basic concepts behind GIS. First of all, I think it's helpful to view a map as really nothing more than a database with spatial information. When you're going to get started on your project, you're going to start with basically a spreadsheet or a database, a file containing attributes about geographies. So attributes can be things like how much, how many, what's the size of the poverty population, what kind. It could be which congressional district it's in, when did this office open, when did this case open, when did it become closed. So you would have a different attribute in each of the columns that you'd associate with each of these geographies. You're going to then need a file containing spatial data. This file would tell the software where this geography is. It's going to give it latitude and longitude coordinates and give it a whole bunch of other information so that your software knows how to plot it on the map, what's the size and shape of it. You're going to join these two files the same way you would join two tables in a database, and link them together. And this is going to give you a file with your data and now with the spatial data that can be mapped. Some of the tools that we're going to talk about later have incorporated the spatial data, and you wouldn't need to worry about that, but fundamentally this is what's going on. Either you're providing the file with the spatial data, or your software is providing it for you so that it is associated with a geographic location and it can be mapped. There's three different ways that you represent geographies. The first is, the technical term is nodes. You'll also hear it called points or dots. For example, this could be, this example is the offices of LSC grantees in 2012. There are arcs, also known as lines. This could be rivers, highways, in this case, subway lines in New York City. And finally, there are polygons. So in this example, this is a percent change in DC population in wards. So each of these wards creates a polygon, a shape that is then shaded into a different color depending on the value. So when you're working with nodes or points, you need to have the address. And you need to either convert it to a latitude and longitude coordinate, or your software could do it for you, depending. You can use color or shape to show different types or categories. So on the bottom left, this map has dots of different colors. Each of the colors represents a different kind of tree. If you want to show proximity and concentration, it is a powerful tool for showing that. And then color of that dot, or the size of the dot, can show magnitude. Word of caution about using a larger circle to show magnitude. The brain can't interpret as well. For example, is this circle half as large as this other circle? So just a word of caution about that, but that is another tool. I think this map on the bottom right is showing the magnitude of earthquakes. So that is another option. I'm going to skip over lines because these are the two types of geographies that you will probably be using the most, dots and polygons. So with polygons, you'd be referencing pre-existing geographies, counties or a police precinct or a census tract. Then you could also possibly create your own geographies. At LSC, for example, we have our service areas, which are geographies that are specific to us, and so we needed to create our own files with these polygons of our service area shapes. So that might be something you might need to do for some of your projects. You can use color to show type or category or quantity. And then you can use styling like cross-hatching or an outline with no fill to show either the type or the category, or just to show the boundaries of an area. And finally, data can be layered. So on the image on the right, you'll see how the top layer might be is dots, and it's health data, for example. Then the next layer is our lines. The next layer, it looks like polygons. And so when you load your different data sets into your software, you'll be able to layer information one on top of each other and toggle them on and off, combine this layer with that layer to show the correlations that you want your data that you want to get out of your data for decision making. I want to pause to see, are there any questions? Okay. We're heading back to Bill, and he's going to tell us about some of his one of his projects where they used mapping for advocacy.
Thank you, Christina. Many programs use mapping for planning and targeting advocacy or measuring outcomes, but it can also be a powerful tool for in anti-poverty advocacy. So let's just look at some examples. Next slide.
All right.
Yeah. So this is a case that the Avondale Glen Elder Neighborhood Association was our client. It's a historically African-American community, and in December 2008, staff from a company called the Sacramento Natural Gas Storage Company went door-to-door contacting our clients and offering them $500 cash and a $200 gasoline card if they would sign a deed giving the mineral rights beneath their home to the company. We later learned that it was their plan to pump 7.5 billion with a B, cubic feet of natural gas into the bedrock beneath the homes. In time, we learned that this had never been done in a residential area before, and it presented great risks to the family in the area and would reduce the value of their homes, their largest asset. Next slide. We created many maps, but here are two maps which make, I think, a particular point. The map on the left shows three sites where there is a geological formation beneath the earth where it might be possible to store gas. In the upper left-hand corner, it's a magenta line draws that. In the bottom central area, it's a blue line. And the middle area is the area where our clients live. What we did is overlay race in the area with, as you can see, the areas of the darker areas being the largest concentration of people of color, the green areas being the less concentration of people of color. So two of the gas potential areas to store gas were in largely white areas. The Sacramento Natural Gas was focusing particularly on the area of the highest concentration of African American and people of color. The map to the right made a different point. We removed the race and poverty information and showed that two of the gas fields are crossed by major highways. The state of California objected to pumping gas beneath the highway because it would be too dangerous. Next slide. So we went to see what were the characteristics of the area where our clients lived, and what you see here is a graded. The grading of the colors shows the concentration of people of color, with ranging from the lightest green area, 52% people of color, to the darkest green area, 91% people of color. So there's a very high concentration of people of color in this area. On top of those areas, we put pie charts to show poverty. And you can see in the darkest green area, we also have what is a 94% poverty rate. So clearly the targeting had a lot to do with race and socioeconomic status. Next slide. We also created a map of the area which showed the current burdens, environmental burdens that this neighborhood bore. The green stars are areas of refuse and recycling facilities. The red diamonds are toxic release sites, and the broken line is a Superfund site. The former Army Depot is a Superfund site because of a high level of toxics. So the area was already burdened with more than its share of toxics. These maps and many others really served to help us in a 6-year effort to stop the pumping of natural gas beneath our client's home. So move on to the next slide. So it's great to use those slides that are pretty, that take some time and tell a story. But I want advocates to understand that you can make maps in less than an hour that are indeed game changers. Let's go to the next slide and look at one of those. The Butte County is a county in California, was suggesting closing all mental health clinics and requiring all mental health consumers to come to the downtown area because intuitively everyone knew that mentally ill people hang out in downtown. That's what they see, that's what people complain about. Let's just put the centers there and get them inside. So that was going to a city council meeting one evening. Our staff in the Chico office in Butte County created this dot map to show the sites where mental health consumers live. As you can see, it's sort of a shotgun perspective. It shows, yes, a lot are concentrated in the central area, but people live out in the rural areas, and they live all over. And they're being served by satellite clinics, which are close to them. By removing these satellite clinics, mental health consumers would not have access to the care they need. This was enough, this map alone was enough to cause them to take the matter off calendar and restudy it. It was put together in less than an hour in a very simple mapping software. Next slide. Many times decision makers are really biased against our clients, and they believe that our clients complain a lot and the burdens that they bear are not real burdens. When Sacramento County proposed to close a healthcare clinic in the Northeast Center, we put together this map, again, in less than an hour to show that what that burden actually would be. So there would be a 3-mile trip at a cost of $1 to get to a transit center from the Northwest Health Center. It would be 7.6 miles by bus, followed by 3 miles walking to get to the closest center. It would take 1.2 hours, cost $2.50. Actually, the total is $3.50 each way, and it could take as much as half a day to go to an appointment if the clinic were closed. This map caused the Board of Supervisors to reconsider and to take it off calendar to restudy if there was a better way to consolidate healthcare services. In fact, the Northwest Health Center was not closed that year. 2 years later, it was closed because of devastating cuts. But in this case, the map was the one piece of evidence that people on the Board of Supervisors really could not refute, and it measured the pain that they were delivering to real people, and they backed off. So next slide. If there's any takeaway from this, it's that maps are processed differently by the brain than written and spoken material is, and they give you a chance to bypass bias and filters that could, in fact, work against our clients. And secondly, and this is really important, GIS is hard, but there's a lot of mapping software that isn't. Maps don't have to be pretty to be effective. So I really would encourage advocates and all programs to get their advocates into the habit of mapping inequity. It can be a powerful tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Next, we're going to hear from Dave Sobie at the Legal Aid of North Carolina, and he's going to share with us some maps from a project on assessing office locations.
Okay, am I on?
You are on. We can hear
good.
you.
Okay, I'm on mute. Great. Thank you. Thank you again for having this topic on GIS. I'm Dave Sobie again from Legal Aid North Carolina. I've been working with ArcGIS for about 6 years now, and in North Carolina we have 100 counties with 18 service areas. So we'll go ahead and get going on to the next slide. And a few years ago we decided we were looking at asking ourselves a question if we need an additional legal aid office in this particular area. You see the focus area, particularly in Richmond County, we had an idea out within Rockingham, the city of Rockingham within Richmond. But as you can see around the focus area, there are offices east, west, and north, but nothing really in the center area with the focus area. which leads to our next slide. Why are we going to map the data? What do we want to do? Of course, we're asking ourselves the question, do we need an additional legal aid office? Importantly, we wanted to see the spatial relationships within this area. That's a key. So we're asking ourselves the question, where are the concentrated areas of poverty? Where are the concentrated areas of poverty for adults? Where are the for children, for seniors, etc.? I did about probably conservatively 25 to 30 maps just on this area alone. I could only show 5 or 6 today. We looked at different areas like median household income, unemployment data, just to name a few. And while you're mapping, you're gonna map data, which is going to raise additional questions for further inquiry, and it did it for me for this project. I had to do, or I just was thinking of stuff. This might work. Let's try this. Let's try that, and thus I had about 25 to 30 to 35 maps. And we'll take a look. We'll go to the next screen and show you within the focus area. This is percent of population below 185% of poverty level at the block group level. This is using the census data, American Community Survey 5-year data from 2009. The 5-year data will allow you to go down, dig inside the counties. As you can see here, this is showing us areas of poverty, which you cannot get really from printed material necessarily. I have on to the right of this map here, Fort Bragg, which is in the shaded purple, which I think most folks know or have heard of Fort Bragg in North Carolina, but basically it's surrounded by poverty, as you can see here. Also included populated areas. These are our local towns and cities, places that I drive through, and I can see that Rockingham, which I didn't realize has high concentrations of poverty, as well as other sections. This is particularly a high poverty area of the state, located in the central portion bordering South Carolina. We'll look at the next map. Now this next one here is identical to the map before, but what I've added onto this map are where our clients live. This is called a geocode. You can see I put address locations for cases from 2009 and 2010. The reason I did that is if you have 1,000 addresses you want to geocode or map, you're not going to get an exact 1,000 back on your map, because a lot of our clients here and a lot of clients that you guys probably have too have bad addresses. P.O. box numbers can't be geocoded, unknown addresses. They're just 10 to 15% is automatically going to be tossed out. So what I do sometimes, I'll combine years, which gives kind of a more of an accurate representation of where clients are coming from. So we can see here, we got a lot in Scotland County. Now, Scotland County, if you're a resident of Scotland County, your office is just off to the east. That's where the clients from there will go. We'll look to Richmond County here. We do have a presence in there. We can see with the red geocoded dots. We also have high areas of poverty. A lot of clients in these areas have to drive 30 to 40 to 50 miles just to get to an office. It's a long way off, and this is one reason why we did this as well, is to find a way to serve, to get in there, to get involved with the clients. Next map, please. And while doing this, again, this is raising additional questions. I decided to try, well, let's look at extreme poverty. And this is 50% or less of the federal poverty level. And when I did this, I was kind of shocked to see how high some of these block groups came back with, 25 or greater of their population in extreme poverty. And what I added in this map, as you can see, there's a 10-mile buffer, which is kind of giving again, a spatial relationship. 10 miles from the center of Rockingham is the distance. So this is a big area that's not being covered, as you can see. Again, Scotland County, that's our poorest county out of 100 counties in North Carolina, but you can see with the 10-mile buffer, it's giving a visual on the distance that clients have to travel in this area. Next map. And the next couple, I've zoomed in even closer to Richmond County. We're getting in closer here. It's the same data from the American Community Survey. This one is showing the number below 185% of poverty level. And remember, when you're looking at American Community Survey data, they're estimates. They say that they have margin of errors, but I think they kind of get you into the ballpark of where poverty is or what data you're looking for is at. I did the numbers here, and I kept the clients from open cases from 2009 and 2010. Again, we're zooming in. We can see closely where we do have clients in where the areas of poverty are. And in this particular county, as the number I have up here, we got 22,000 people below 185% of the poverty level just in this county alone. And the next county is the next map. Same county, but what I did instead of showing the number is I'm showing the percent of poverty. Percent of people below 185% of poverty level. Again, another way of looking at the data, a different perspective, and this is just showing roughly half the county that is below 185% of poverty level. So what do we get out of this? Well, we decided to establish an office in Rockingham. I also was talking to our executive director not too long ago, and he said another key factor in deciding to put an office down there was the real high rates of childhood poverty in this part of the state. And I believe in North Carolina, I think we have about I'm sure the number is 22%, I think, is the average. But in some of these block groups in this section or in the focus area we're looking at, we're getting up to about 50, 60, 70% of childhood poverty. That's really high. We also have noticed since we've been down there for a couple of years an increased number of clients coming from this area. I know one of the next projects I'm going to do, a mapping project, is to compare before the office was there and since the office has been there, the clients. So I'm going to find a way to map that, to show that, and present that. Another key thing we did is we got local judges involved. They got involved and they allowed us, Legal Aid of North Carolina, to do domestic violence work in neighboring Anson County, which is just to the west. I think there were some probably like judicial boundaries we couldn't cross before, but I think they realized, the judges, that we were trying to work down there. We'll work with you. Come on over. Do DV work over in Anson County. I think it's a great win-win situation for our clients and for the local, the bar association, I'm sure, too. And the last thing is reduced travel time for clients. Now, a lot of these clients are not going to have to drive 30 to 40 to 50 miles to get to an office. They don't have to take off a full day of work. A lot of them can't do that. We know that. Also, a lot of families only have one car. So this is really helping them for us to have a presence down in this section of the state that they can use as a resource. And what I think we've gained from this map project advice, again, create more maps than what you need. Again, I did about 25 to 30 maps. I think it always comes in handy to do a few extra ones because they will come in handy. You will need them more than you think. Another thing I find really helpful is to search the web for map examples. What I do is I'll go to Google Images, and let's say I type in GIS poverty maps or GIS housing maps or consumer or employment, and you're going to find some amazing stuff that people are doing throughout the United States on mapping. You're going to get great ideas. You're going to see how they're doing their layers, their colors, their layouts. And what I do is I have a folder where I save, it's called GIS Maps Samples. I save stuff that I like so I can come back and try to emulate or see what they're doing because there's some really good stuff out there. And it always changes, too, because there's always new stuff coming out. Another great resource is to check out your local county or city GIS departments. Again, we got 100 counties here in North Carolina, and I think about 2/3 of them have a GIS department. You can find some good data for your GIS software to use. So, like, I'm trying to think of something we did, a medical legal partnership thing we did not too long ago. I believe I went to one of the sites and grabbed the locations for hospitals and clinics, and this site happened to have it. You can find some very useful tools on the GIS sites and also see sample maps as well. One thing I've learned is to avoid trying to put too much information or data onto your maps. They can get real crowded. Sometimes it's really hard to decide what not to put on there and what to put on there. If you think you've got too much, you might want to try to split them up into two maps. That comes with practice. I can look back at stuff I did 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, thinking, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? I think too much information on the map or too much data or layers is going to hurt. Is going to turn people off. Maybe that's another way of saying it. It's just too much information. They don't want to look at it. Create a workflow. It'll save you a lot of time. I have, again, North Carolina. I have 100 folders for the county GIS files. I have 18 folders for our service areas. It's just another way of getting organized, and you'll find ways where you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you create a map. And lastly, experiment. Experiment. You've got to experiment with new ideas. Maybe you're on the American Community Survey, for example, and you see something you might want to map. Maybe it's female poverty or male poverty. Do a comparison. Try it out. See what it looks like. Because you may be the first person that's mapping data that could be very relevant to your organization that people have never seen before. You've got to try things. Sometimes it'll come out looking pretty good. Sometimes it won't, but you got to try. Also try, your layouts, your layers. Try different settings. GIS is limitless. You have complete control of what you do in your maps. So I'll leave it at that. Are there any questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you.
Our last presenter is Jonathan Pyle from the Philadelphia Legal Assistance, and he's going to show how his program did. Did we have a? Okay, I'm sorry. He's going to show how his program used a mapping project for program assessment.
Hi, this is John Pyle. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. So I'm going to talk about how programs can use maps internally just for figuring out how well the program is doing at meeting its own goals. On the next slide, I show some data that we gathered just from comparing census data to our information in our case management system. And we looked by race, by the race that we collect during intake and the race that people identify in their census forms. And we found that if we look at intakes per year as a proportion of people in poverty who identify as a certain race and compare the ratios, there's a pretty big discrepancy between the African American population that we serve and the Asian population in poverty that we serve. And there are a number of different reasons why there can be such a discrepancy. But one theory that we had is that we might be underserving the Asian population because they don't speak English, and as a result, they don't really know that we exist. They don't know that we have a language access policy, and we will help them regardless of language. So we looked into the idea that maybe we could do some outreach to certain populations in Philadelphia that don't speak English well and that speak Asian languages. So on the next slide, we took some census data, on the next slide, this is just the anecdotal way of looking at the information. This is just a plot of the social service agencies that people know about that serve the Asian language communities. We have an obvious community in Center City, or Chinatown, and then we have a number of other organizations that we work with, and people from some of these organizations are on our board. So we could approach this non-geographically and just go to them and try to encourage people in their community to come to us for legal assistance. But it would be a little bit more robust to look at it with the census data. And on the next slide, we show some data from the American Community Survey 5-year estimates. And it's showing what we call linguistically isolated households. These are households where nobody over the age of 14 speaks English very well. So these are households where maybe people are employed, but maybe they're not. But they really don't have anybody who speaks English well enough to take them to a legal services office. And if you compare the anecdotal analysis to the data analysis, you find that, yes, those organizations are located in areas with a high proportion of linguistically isolated Asian language households, but there are also plenty of areas outside of or not near these organizations that seem to have high concentrations of linguistically isolated households. So reaching out to these organizations might not be enough, especially because Asia is an enormous continent with many different cultures, and there are different language groups in Philadelphia, and not all of them necessarily have organizations that serve them. So the next question for us was, well, maybe we're serving some of these populations pretty well already. So in the next slide, I map information not from the U.S. Census Bureau, but from our case management system. And these are, and it's a little bit spotty, these are the number of intakes where the race is identified as Asian and where the language is something other than English. So there are some areas where we don't get any such clients. And we can see that the blue areas where there is a relatively large number of these intakes pretty much overlap with the blue areas from the census data. But I find it hard to compare two different maps side by side or even layering them. So I think it's helpful to graph the ratio of those two numbers. So the number of intakes divided by the number of people in poverty in that particular category. Now that ratio itself is not a terribly meaningful number, but you can compare neighborhood to neighborhood. And so in the next slide, I show the ratio graph of the two previous slides combined. And what this shows is that there are blue areas where we're doing relatively well. We're serving a relatively high proportion of the linguistically isolated households. And the red areas are areas where we might need to improve, where that ratio is relatively small. Interestingly, the Chinatown area, even though it's close to legal services offices, is a somewhat red area relative to some others. But luckily, our office at PLA is moving in a couple days to the Chinatown area, so we might increase the proportion of clients we get in that neighborhood. And then we can notice that there are certain areas where that are particularly red that might be targets for extended outreach. And this Google map that I'm using, which originated in a KML file, which is the sort of Google standard for mapping, uses the opacity of the polygon, which sounds like a lot of complicated words, but the see-throughness, how opaque is it, as one way to plot some data. So the color itself is representing the ratio, but the see-throughness represents the significance of the ratio, how many people there actually are in that neighborhood. Because some neighborhoods where the number of people is small but the ratio is large, it's probably not a priority. But using that as another data point that you visualize is helpful to me when I create these maps. So my target for outreach to these linguistically isolated households in the Asian community are going to be these red neighborhoods. And so in the next slide, I zoom in on one of these neighborhoods. And the nice thing about Google Maps is that it's somewhat interactive. You can zoom in and click on things, and within the KML file, you can hide other information. So I've got some various demographic information from the Census Bureau attached to each neighborhood. And each one of these neighborhoods is what the Census Bureau calls a census tract. It's roughly about 1,500 people, give or take. And so when I look at the information about this neighborhood, it suggests to me that the number of people in poverty who are Asian and linguistically isolated is relatively small. And so maybe this is a neighborhood where there's a lot of people who are linguistically isolated, but maybe they have jobs. So maybe they don't qualify for our services. So in the next slide, I look at another neighborhood. And the nice thing about an interactive map is you can just explore from neighborhood to neighborhood and click on things. And so in this next census tract that I look at right there in the corner, I see that there is a high proportion of poverty. So this might be a real target for outreach to the linguistically isolated Asian language communities. And in Google Maps, I can zoom in even more. And on the next slide, I show just that census tract. And I've done a search by keyword for an organization that I might reach out to. Like in this example, I searched for a church. So maybe there's a church that serves that community that we could go to and hand out flyers or give a talk. And the third result is the Salvation Army. So using a GIS solution that has Google Maps capabilities can be very helpful. And one thing that I've noticed is that I can look at a map of Philadelphia and know where everything is. Maybe I'm just I've looked at a lot of maps, or I'm spatially oriented, but I found a lot of other folks, unless they see cross streets or landmarks, they're not quite sure. They don't necessarily know the shape of the area where they live. So it's helpful to have those types of landmarks in your map to help people understand them. So my suggestions, which I think I have on the next slide, are people take time to understand the U.S. Census Bureau before you go into GIS. GIS is confusing, although the tools are getting better, but actually finding the data that you are interested in can be pretty difficult. And there's a pretty steep learning curve to understanding how the how the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey actually works and how it structures its data. And I once spent half an hour searching for zip code information, only to learn that you have to look nationally before you can't look statewide at zip codes. So there's a big learning curve there, but it's not particularly technical. And you can go on the American Fact Finder website and just dig around and look at various subjects, and that might give you ideas about things that you want to map. Because just thinking about it in the abstract, it's hard to come up with ideas for what to map. And the second thing I want to plug is a TIG project that I'm about to complete, which is to create a web application for creating the types of maps that I just showed and doing other types of statistical analyses on case data and census data. So this, you can read more about it on this website, but the web application allows you to upload information in your case management system. It will geolocate the addresses for you. It will pull the shape files and demographic information automatically from the Census Bureau and pull it all together and let you analyze it and create maps as well as graphs and spreadsheets from all of that information. So it's my attempt to automate the kind of stuff that I'm able to do because I know GIS. But that's what I have.
Thank you, Jonathan. Before I go on, we want to make sure that everyone knows that we have plenty of time for questions. If you have questions, please type it into the chat feature so that we can answer them one at a time. We got a question from someone, where do you get the addresses for community features like mental health centers? Bill, do you want to share how you got that? And I'd love to hear from everyone. And Dave talked about it a little bit in approaching the GIS departments in his counties and cities, but I'd love to hear more about where you're getting some of this data that you're being able to map.
Specifically with regard to certainly the sensitive data about the residences of mental health consumers, we got the data from the Mental Health Project, from the workers. Now, as you might imagine, closing clinics meant the loss of jobs. There were a lot of people within those clinics who were very concerned and didn't want to see them closed. Through backline communication, they said that the supervisors had asked them to create to create data about where the consumers lived, but that would be stripped of personal information. And so we got it from the inside. They sent it to us. There's a lot of data, and because it was prepared for a report, it was public. So we made a Public Records Act request, but we actually got it before we made the Public Records Act request.
Jonathan and Dave, is there anything you want to jump in and say, anything else about where some other resources for getting insider data like that?
There's one thing we have in North Carolina that's called I forget the name of it. It's called NC1 Map, which is basically a center for statewide community where all the GIS stuff is pulled together. State and local governments do this. You can get stuff there. And what I've done before, if I can't find particular information, I'll look up the address. I'll have to go to the actual place, get the address, and then geocode it. If that makes any sense. So there are several ways of doing it.
I found that
I'm sorry.
There are certain websites that do open government, and if you search for like open government in your community, you might find that some group of hackers have put together a database of geographic information.
Because I haven't checked this lately. I think the city of Charlotte here in North Carolina is kind of close to, releasing their GIS data, but they have an open consort. They have their own. Somebody else is running a bootleg version, I guess, if you want to call it that. But there's ways of finding data.
I would also suggest that from an advocacy standpoint, using data from the inside of the target of your advocacy. So if the county is your target for advocacy, using their own data, even if you think it's wrong, is incredibly powerful, because they'll say, where did you get this data? Go, no, it's yours. And so even if it understates the pain, if it understates what you think, but it still makes the point, sometimes using data that's produced by the target of your advocacy is actually quite powerful.
You have to worry about confidentiality when you put dots on a map, because a dot could identify a client, especially in a rural area.
The dots don't represent specific addresses, but they represent, say, a block or a census tract area. So they're not specific. And am I concerned? I might be. But I think in the example that we showed to you, that was put together in an afternoon in less than an hour, there was no way that you could take from that map. You could take that map and identify a specific address.
You really, really, really have to zoom in to a real high detail. And I think even doing that, you're not really going to be, I think, giving any confidentiality away.
Oddly, it wasn't that they were convinced that it would inconvenience the mental health consumers. The reason they withdrew it is they saw a horde of mental health consumers now coming into town, and that's why they stopped. It wasn't the reason we wanted them to do it, but they said, oh my God, all these people are going to come into town now?
I love this discussion, and we have some more questions coming in. I want to just go over a few bullet points of a few free mapping tools. They're listed here. You can check out LRI. The URL is right there for more information about these tools and some of the, you could say pros and cons, or some of the features that one might have that another doesn't. So do check this out. I also want to say again that on May 14th and 21st, same time, same place, we'll be having a tutorial, more in-depth tutorial on Google Fusion tables. So, taking a simulated project from beginning to end, and how you can get started on your own projects. Couple other questions that are that we've received: Mac versus PC, pros or cons? What are you all using, Macs or PCs, and do you think it makes a difference?
Well, I use a PC at work, Mac at home, but I don't have GIS at home, so I don't know if it makes a difference. I really don't know.
Well, I'll jump in really quickly. Here at LSC, we have PCs, and I use QGIS, and that I think that they have a Mac-compatible version, but also the three top bullets, these that you see on the screen right now, these are all web-based. So Mac or PC wouldn't make a difference. You would just need to have an internet connection. Bill or Jonathan?
I have no experience with Macs.
Yeah, I would suggest gravitating toward web-based solutions.
Another question we got, Dave mentioned a workflow. Do you have any other time-saving tips?
Let me try to think this out here. I guess when you join your data to the ArcGIS shape files, I have a lot of stuff in Excel. So, for example, let's say in Richmond County, which we were talking about, I'll have an Excel spreadsheet that has the Richmond County block groups and their join numbers, or it's called the FID feature ID number, 1 through maybe 130 or something like that. Because in the map software, it has the same thing, 1 through 30. You got to make sure these join together and that your data joins together. So I'll have all these Excel spreadsheets with block group data, census tract data for a particular county. So that's kind of a shortcut I use too. So when I get data from the census, I can just plug it into the Excel spreadsheet and then merge that with the ArcGIS and make it work, if that makes sense.
I want to jump in and say, I think, Dave, you said something about being organized. I want to echo that. Here at LSC, the main purpose for the mapping project that I do here in the Office of Program Performance is in advance of program quality visits. And but you never know when after the program quality visit has ended, then someone requests an additional map. So that's one thing I want to echo, to be really organized, to save your data, to label it very clearly, because you never know when there will be follow-up questions when, like Dave said, you have a project and then you want to do 2 years later the compare. And so, that's really important, to be very organized with your data. Jonathan or Bill, do you have any other time-saving tips?
I don't.
Well.
No,
go ahead. No.
Okay. We had another question. It was, does anyone have dedicated staff for mapping?
Dedicated staff for mapping? No, not in North Carolina.
I'm the go-to person for mapping at my organization, but it's only a small percentage of what I do. My suggestion on that is that the go-to person for mapping not be merely a technical person. I don't think people should treat this as an IT function. It really does require understanding the programmatic aspects of legal services. It's not just something like installing Windows on a computer.
We've had 2 people who were attorneys who had as their task being the primary mappers. One of them, Eric Schulteis, left, and he's now getting his PhD in advocacy mapping at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The second one who picked up the skill, Maya Roy, is down in LA doing mapping for advocacy. In our program, though, all advocates have to be able to create basic maps. It's basic training, because we think we have to create a consumer base. Someone has to wrestle with maps to understand how they can be used. So all of our attorneys are required to make maps, basically just poverty, race, things like that. And we map our entire service area every few years. So we're going through that process right now. This time we'll be using Google Maps engine to map our entire service area. It serves 2 or 3 important goals. One is it gets all of our advocates into mapping. It introduces them to an online tool that has some end, and it creates a consumer base for maps that then require that we have somebody in the program who can do really high-quality mapping. We don't currently have that person, but we're looking for them now. And I agree that they should be advocates, not tech people. That advocacy mapping, I think, is different.
Great. I had a question from someone. What formats does GIS/spatial data come in? I can take that. The 2 formats that are most seen most frequently are SHP files and KML files. So SHP files were developed by a company called Esri, which is the company that produces ArcGIS, which is a very sophisticated, high-end mapping software. And other softwares also accept SHP, such as QGIS. And you can and by the way, we are developing more resources so you can find out more about SHPs, KMLs, and all the stuff that we're talking about on LRI very soon, in addition to the page we already posted. If you go to the census page, they have something called Tiger Line. So you can Google Tiger Line, and you can actually download SHPs for many of the the political geographies that are out there, like county census tracts, like native areas, block groups, places,
yeah.
Right. And then there's KMLs. KMLs are managed by Google. If you're using like Google Earth or Google Maps Engine Lite, these tools will be exporting as KML files. So it's kind of a similar thing, just a different file type. And there's fewer options out there. For example, Tigerline, like they offer counties and census tracts, but nothing else, I believe, as KML files. So there are also converters out there. So if you had a KML and you needed to be an SHP, or vice versa, you could convert it back and forth if you needed that. There's another question. Most maps presented today were for ad hoc purposes, but does anyone find maps that your organization is updating and presenting continuously? Well, one example from here at LSC, on LRI, we have a page on limited English proficiency folks, and that's a map, if you've seen it, that we plan to continually update as more data comes in. Bill, Dave, and Jonathan, do you have maps that you're continuously updating and keeping fresh?
This is Dave. I think the in-house stuff we do when the census releases their stuff in the fall, we map that stuff right away to see what the latest how the poverty is looking, and along with the maps, we'll accompany that with charts and pie charts as well. So we're kind of continually doing that on a yearly basis.
At Philadelphia Legal Assistance, one of the things we look at every once in a while is the changes in poverty. So we calculate the current poverty rate in a neighborhood and subtract the poverty rate from a couple years ago, from like the last American Community Survey or decennial census, and then plot that, and it shows us where poverty is growing, what neighborhoods are gentrifying, so that people can update the information they have in their brains, which might be anecdotal.
I would say that we don't continually update anything. I wish we would, but it takes a lot of time. Our service area is the size of Ohio, and it just takes a lot of time. We do periodically for the Race Equity Project map for poverty, race, and ethnicity, and we're doing that right now. But it's been a few years since we've done it.
I just want to throw in that, to update maps continuously, I think that makes a lot of sense for a communications perspective too. Today we talked about advocacy, planning, and assessment, but mapping for communications. So, for example, an organization here in DC that I know of has maps that they use to demonstrate their impact in the city, and so every year they're updating it so they can show the impact of the services they deliver, and that's another example of a different way to use maps. Okay, new question. Is there data sets for limited English speaking in poverty? I have seen poverty by language, but not for limited English speaking. Has anyone found this out there?
I don't know. I think it sounds like the person's on the right track. Maybe looking in the through the ACS, I assume. I would keep digging down, using keywords, poverty, and language, and maybe you might hit something, but it doesn't ring a bell to have all those combined together. But I'd keep trying, keep using your keywords.
There is a census feature that will give you sort of itemized data. I think it's called the PUMS, but I could have that wrong. So if you want to do any kind of cross-referencing of any poverty statistics that they don't normally offer, you can do that, and it uses sample data. So you can try to approach it that way, but that's pretty advanced. And I haven't seen that kind of statistic in the American Community Survey. I might have just missed it, but that's my suggestion.
This is Christina. We looked for it, and what we rely on is table B16002 is households that are linguistically isolated, and Jonathan mentioned that earlier. And again, that means that no one over the age of 14 speaks English very well, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that the household is in poverty, but if no one speaks English very well, then that might be a good indicator. And so it's not really what you're looking for, but that's another option. We got a comment that says, check local and county sources or organizations which serve LEP folks because they might collect the data. So that's another tip. Final call for questions. Okay, and someone has also suggested the B16009 table in the American Community Survey, ACS, for LEP data. I really enjoyed being a part of this conversation. Thank you to Dave, Bill, and Jonathan. Thank you to Mara for, sorry. Okay, here's my last slide. Thank you to all of you for being here. Here's our contact information if you have additional questions. And again, join us for parts 2 and 3 on May 14th and May 21st. And today's webinar will also be posted on the LSNTAP YouTube, so you can come back and check out some more resources. So thank you, everyone.
Just to let everybody know, inside the chat, there is a link to the slides. The slides are available to be downloaded. There is also a link to a very short 4-question survey. One of the questions involves, are there advanced questions that you have? We'll be passing those on to the presenters to put those into the next 2 advanced trainings. I'll be putting those links in one more time. Thank you all for showing up. Excellent. Thank you also to all the speakers. This great presentation.
Thank you.
It's fun.